I'd like, if that's okay with you guys, to begin our panel with 5 minutes, 6 minutes. Each one of you can take free, talking freely. And I'd like you to basically present the institution you're coming from. And maybe you'll begin with personal introductions. I couldn't go into all of the amazing things that you've done, double doctorates, professorships, and other domains. So if you wouldn't mind doing it for me. And I'd like you also to try to explain to us what is the claim for fame in your company or your institution. And I'd like to begin perhaps with you, Naomi. You would like to start?
Sure. Hi.
Welcome, you done?
First of all, thank you, Ran, for the invitation. It's such an honor to be here. So my name is Noemi El Haddad. I'm a computer scientist by training. I did my PhD in natural language processing, and I moved into the world of healthcare in 2007, so a while ago now, but I am now chair of the Department of Biomedical Informatics at Columbia University, a university you might have heard about in the news recently, but more specific to this topic, there's this weird noise coming again. No, we're good. I think our department is very much anchored in advancing fundamental AI research for healthcare, machine learning for healthcare, informatics, putting together data that are relevant to health and healthcare and biomedicine, and also being extremely applied. So we're known in our country, in the US and across the world, for being one of the oldest departments that is heavily linked to our healthcare system, New York Presbyterian Hospital. We treat over, we have a large data warehouse of about 7.5 million, 8 million patients across 20 years of data, and our population are patients in New York City, so a heavily diverse demographically and clinically patient population. We go from primary care to ICU, ED, etc. And so the abilities that we have is to have this rapid deployment workflow of going from fundamental research to packaging or fundamental AI research into tools for clinicians or patient-facing tools, into deploying them into the healthcare system, and thinking in a way of our healthcare system as a sandbox for evaluation of research. I like to think about the whole learning health system metaphor, which is how do we generate evidence that then is going to be translated into care, that then will generate new data that then can be used to generate new evidence. And one of the things that our department is very famous for, in addition to this pipeline of deployment of fundamental AI, is generation of new evidence. So we are the coordinating center for an international network called Odyssey, Observational Health Data Science and Informatics, which does very basic but very important informatics work, which is to do semantic harmonization and common data modeling of clinical data. These type of initiatives are important. We are doing a federated open science architecture. There's some work in Israel, actually, but across many, many countries. And overall, there are 900 million patient lives that are covered by this basic common data model. And so based on this data, we can now ask questions like, are guidelines accurate? Should we update guidelines based on real-world evidence? And we're able to do so in a very rapid framework thanks to this common data model. I think it's useful to think of this in the context of AI and in the context of then deploying and translating these questions into healthcare. So I'll give you maybe 2 examples of work in my department that we are very proud of. One is I'm going to call it traditional AI, which is maybe a bit of an unfair way of describing it, is a very common problem, which is when a patient is admitted to the hospital, can we predict the deterioration of the health status of the patient? One of the most common outcomes is sepsis prediction, but there are many other outcomes, such as should the patient be admitted into the ICU, will there be death without sepsis, etc. So one of our researchers, Sarah Rossetti, has been building models that are not only looking at physiological data, but also looking at nursing documentation and literally the words that nurses use when describing the patient status. And she has shown through these pragmatic trials, prospective trials across different hospitals throughout the nation, about 20 different hospitals, that her models are able to detect deterioration way earlier than others. And in particular, they're able to decrease the risk of mortality by 30%, decrease the risk of admission to ICU by 10%, decrease the risk of sepsis by about 7%. Those are very significant because that's an example very much like the example that Regina talked about, where we can, if we know earlier, we can actually act upon this. With this data, we can now learn new evidence about this, and that's really the goal here, is that we can deploy these tools, change healthcare through AI, but also generate now new data that are going to help us understand better patient predictions. The last model, I'm using way more than 5 minutes, am I? The last model that I want to talk about is one of opportunistic screening through AI. So this is the work of Pierre Elias, who's a cardiologist and informaticist, where he's looking at very common tests, an electrocardiogram. There are millions of those being done. Humans, when they look at an electrocardiogram, can say a few things about heart rhythm, but that's about it. And he's using this routine exam to detect structural heart disease. About 10% of older patients, older individuals have structural heart disease. And he has shown through a randomized trial, again, across all the nation, with strong collaboration from many different hospitals, that his model is able to detect and diagnose structural heart disease through this very routine exam in a way that humans were not able to before. So what's significant about this is that it's changing the healthcare system. We need now to have, this is very US-centric, I guess, but we need new billing codes that are going to enable agentic AI to say, this electrocardiogram, no one asked us to look at it for structural heart disease, but no, as an AI agent, I'm going to go and decide which next test needs to be ordered. Is it a sonogram, an MRI, etc.? And so it opens up a whole lot of new information about how it's going to change, again, healthcare delivery. I'll stop here.
Thank you so much. And I think these are amazing examples of how you can actually change the practice of care in the hospitals. Noam, on to you. You did 2 doctorates and got bored, and then you did something, a small fit. You kind of created the largest, most important company in your field in the world, and with amazing success. And you've been able to do this despite the fact that the fruits of some of the things you're doing can only be seen in decades. So do tell us about the claim for fame and how, what do you think about AI?
Sure, and thanks for the, big words. So hey, I'm Noam, born and raised here in Israel. And about 7.5 years ago, I decided to stop my academic pursuit in math and computer science and start Immunai. And there are essentially 2 problems that we are looking at. I'll first mention the business problem. How many people here in the audience are engineers by background?
Engineers, raise your hands. Wow.
So in the last 6 decades, the engineering landscape has completely transformed with a law that the engineers know as Moore's law, that the compute power is doubled every few years. Initially, it was 1.5 years, and then 2 years, and now 3 years. And since I was in high school, many of the same algorithms in AI have been applied later, 2 decades and even 3 decades, more successfully now because of better compute power. But in drug development, we see the opposite law. We see how drugs over the years become less and less effective in the business sense. So the ROI, the return on investment are diminishing. And it was even coined as the literal opposite of Moore, called Erum's law of biotechnology. And so the question is why? Why are we succeeding in advancing technology and science and engineering, but we are unable to improve results for drug development? And there are many reasons, but I think the fundamental reason is that when you do a clinical trial, you give drugs to patients. In the preclinical setting, you give drugs to mice. And human beings don't behave as mice. And not only human beings don't behave as mice, but our immune systems, the four of us, are very different from one another. And so we said in the beginning, 7.5 years ago, in order to improve drug development, you need to map the immune system. So that's the second problem. The business problem is drug development is failing. The technical, scientific problem is how can we map the immune system? And the claim to fame that we have is that we have created this virtual immune system by mapping tens of thousands of patients. And it was mentioned before, millions. And I want to talk about the gap between tens of thousands and millions. It also goes back to Regina's talk earlier, who is also on our scientific advisory board. There is a difference between mapping patients with pathology data and mapping patients with single-cell sequencing data. And again, some of you are doing business, so it's just a matter of numbers. Taking a single-cell sequencing sample from one patient equals about $3,000 in spending. So if you want to do it like 1 million times, so be prepared to spend the $3 billion. And for this, we said 7 years ago, we are going to work with all the pharma companies and all the biotechnology companies, and we are going to help them develop their drugs so we can build our own AI. And so about the claim to fame, and one thing that I'm proud of is that over the last 7 years, we've been supporting pharma decision-making in clinical trials, but 2 months ago, we announced that we, together with AstraZeneca, we have taken some targets for inflammatory bowel diseases, Crohn's and colitis. These are debilitating conditions that millions of patients around the world are suffering from, and I'm sure that a few people in the audience here. And they took a few targets from us, and they are now developing drugs based on this, and I hope it's going to reach patients later.
Amazing. Just so you know, in 2021, I think it was, that your valuation was $1 billion, but don't worry, they're moving forward. They're not going to stay as shy as that. So not bad at all. Thank you for this. This was really inspiring. Idan, going to you, and you know, everybody says that basically the most used AI in healthcare domain is radiology, and I think that is true, right? The highest number of patents, the highest number of applications approved by the FDA goes to that domain. Is Israel in any shape and form a leader in this domain? What does your company do in this domain? And maybe some more things that you can tell us about the forefront of where you're staying.
Okay, nice to see everyone here. And my name is Idan Basuk. I started as the first employee of ADOC about 9.5 years ago, and today I lead our R&D and AI organization. ADOC today is deployed in over 1,500 or 1,600 even hospitals worldwide, including most of the hospitals in Israel, and analyzing about 60 million exams each year. 60 million radiology exams each year with very significant clinical outcomes. So our clinical outcomes, what our product does, maybe I'll start from that essentially for those who don't know it. It basically runs and analyzes every radiology exam, be it X-ray, CT, mammography, and others, and analyzes it with dozens of different clinical solutions that detect different clinical findings, from brain hemorrhages and brain aneurysms to cervical spine fractures, pulmonary embolism, and even pneumothorax. And we analyze and detect these findings and show these indications to the radiologist analyzing the exams. And the outcomes of these solutions span from triage by expediting the care of the people that have these conditions between 50 to 90% shortening in time to read their exam, to enhance detection. Radiologists reading with ADOC report about, depending on the clinical condition, between 5 to sometimes even 30% more findings than without ADOC. And even clinical outcomes such as length of stay reduction. So I think we are growing rapidly. And one thing that I want to say is that today we have 30 solutions, but we have a few years ago started developing our foundation model, which is, you can imagine it as sort of a GPT for medical imaging, based on a very, very large medical imaging data set we have from several partners worldwide. And we, about 6 months ago, have achieved a very dramatic performance improvement, which have enabled us to increase the number of algorithms we developed from 30 in 9 years to 50 additional solutions in the past 6 months alone. So in the upcoming 2 to 3 years, we plan to expand our coverage to hundreds of clinical conditions and become the most comprehensive AI solution.
I don't think there's another example to this, to a working FDA-approved foundation model working in radiology. So you've made global success. Could you share with us some of the challenges in using foundation models in the clinical domains and what you've done to overcome them?
Yeah, for sure. So some challenges, first of all, in my opinion, maybe the most important one is AI safety. And I think that it's relevant for any AI, but for sure for healthcare AI, it's critical. And I can say that about 30% of the effort in our algorithm development life cycle and the budget that we invest goes into validating the AI, not into developing the AI, but to validating the AI, finding by finding, understanding what is the sensitivity, the PPV, the specificity, etc., in different conditions across hundreds of different setups and health systems. And one of the challenges in doing it for a foundation model where you want to cover not 20 clinical conditions but hundreds is how you validate this. So we do, and especially given the fact that many of these conditions are very low prevalence. So their prevalence can go even below 0.5 or even 0.1%. And the data is very noisy because also there is a challenge of lack of consensus sometimes between even different radiologists. So actually we built, and it's an ongoing effort, we are building a team of dozens of radiologist advisors that are helping us build these validation data sets, and this is one of the most important vectors of investment that we have today. So this is one example, Ron.
Yeah, amazing. How do you validate when you can suddenly create hundreds or thousands of prediction models in a click? How do you then go ahead and make sure that each one of them is as good as it should be? That's a tough one. I'd like to continue with this note, and Noam, to ask you if you can tell us a little bit about what some of the fundamental differences when you try to do AI for clinical care, which we just heard several examples, and when you try to do it for R&D and in order to create new drugs or new solutions. What is the key difference that you want to kind of mention?
I think the key difference is that when you take a radiology test as an example, or any clinical test that you have an expert that can also tell you what is the result, right? I mean, at the end of the day, you're trying to be at least as good as an expert or the best experts, and then try to get a little bit better. And if experts get to 90%, you want to be at 91%. And there are certain other more tricky questions about safety and bias, and I don't want to get into those elements. It can take a very long time to optimize. But the fundamental thing about clinical applications is that you can ask the experts. In preclinical, I mean, you can ask the expert in mice, but you don't have a real way to know that this is going to work in patients. And a lot of the work that we do for our partners, maybe I'll give another example which I think is important. We worked very hard in patient-derived tumor fragments to show something about a new drug that is still not in clinical trials. And our success is that the vice president that worked with us is fighting with upstairs with the leadership to change the indications that they wanted to do the phase 1 on. But how do we know if we're right or wrong, right? At the end of the day, it's more of a kind of a research without ground truth or an expert to tell you. And the expert in this field, instead of having 90% accuracy, have 5% accuracy. Most research activities fail.
Amazing. So it all boils down to the issue of ground truth and what are the evaluation matrices. And this is something to take home. It's, I would say almost easy these days to create models. It is exceedingly difficult to create models that withstand accuracy and proper evaluation matrices over time. This is where it makes the difference between the men and the boys at the end of the day, and this is the difference with something that can go to clinic and cannot. Every one of us can create shiny demos in almost a click, but then turning that into a product that we're willing to put in the hands of physicians and patients, there's a fairly long way. And in your case, you don't even know what's right. How do we know if what you've identified is even true? You'll know at the end of the clinical trial, maybe in I don't know how many years. Okay, that's good. I'd like to take one last bit from each of you, and I'd like, Nomi, for you to tell me, you're a world leader in one of the most difficult domains in clinical medicine, which is endometriosis diagnosis. It's those of you who are familiar with it, it's very hard to diagnose in time, and women go through horrible odysseys, and through your work, you've been able to dramatically improve some of these odysseys. And on that and on the other domains you're responsible for, I'd like you to opine on what do you think is the next frontier for AI in healthcare. Where do you focus your efforts in 2026?
Sure. I like that you kept it to 1 year. Okay, so I think personally in my own research, I'm very interested in how do we get to the diseases that are for which there's a very bad ground truth. So there's extremely noisy labels in endometriosis because it's a disease that's estimated to be affecting 10% of women. But when we look at these very large data warehouses, so I mentioned Odyssey, across the world, over and over again, the prevalence seems to be about 2%. So there's clearly a mismatch here. And so we want to not only get to the ground truth, but that is according to the data, but really tremendously improve it. I think we get there by having new models, so we can know with clinical data, connect the dots and get on average to a diagnosis 3 years earlier than currently. That's based on some of our experiments in our data set and on some national data sets, but that's only using clinical data. The average is about 7 to 10 years on the path to the diagnosis. I think we're going to get there through models that are able to include much more physiology, many more data that are not about the clinical encounters, because those are heavily biased. Those are where women are being ignored and their symptoms are not being recorded. And so, yes, we can connect the dots to some extent, but there's so much more we can learn from other data. Right now, these foundational models are not yet able to connect, say, physiology of menstruation with, how estrogen changes throughout the menstrual cycle, with symptoms from my watch and my wearables, with the clinical data. But I think that if we get there, we can actually instantly get to a diagnosis.
Amazing. So we're talking about some kind of a multimodal world model, if you'd like, that takes into account the complex biology and not just, the end game of healthcare EHRs. That's amazing view. Idan, AI Doc and its tools are now available to every practitioner at Clalit, both in the hospitals and in the community setting, which is something that is, I think, globally unique. In your view, for 2026, what is the next big move that you see?
Yeah, I think that the next big move that we see, as I said before, is the significant expansion of the product offering that we're going to have, from dozens of clinical conditions to covering hundreds of different clinical conditions using our foundation model. And doing that will require not only a different algorithm, but it will require completely rethinking the workflow around how radiologists or physicians consume this AI. Because it's one thing to consume alerts for 20 findings, and then it's a completely different thing to consume 300 different types of alerts. And we are imagining different workflows, such as writing a draft report, for example, for the radiologist, and providing a very seamless interface to validate this report, both visually and clinically.
Yeah, it's amazing. In our work with Harvard, we are able now to identify 1,500 different conditions in one click through a foundation model. So imagine where that will take us in a very specific, concrete clinical domain and what you can predict. Finally, Noam, you're always living in the future, right? You know, I'm sorry that I have to confine you to 1 year forward, but can you give us some concrete predictions about what will be the big moves of 2026 for AI?
For us.
For you.
So this year we are going to announce a few big partnerships with pharma companies, and you know, really for us it's the ability to influence their decisions in taking certain clinical decisions about choosing the optimal dose, finding the optimal indications, finding the optimal biomarkers. But I think the biggest thing that we are investing in 2026 is our reasoning framework. Because what we learned, and I think it's an important lesson, that in many, many, many cases, the predictive power, the specificity, the sensitivity is limited. It's not 99%, it's not 90%. Let's say it's 65 or 70% balance accuracy. But with this modest predictive power, we're able to take the top immunological features that the models find and then run it through a reasoning framework. And this is going to be, I think, a very big and important milestone for us that we unlock, but I think the entire industry is going to the explainability of AI and not just the predicting.
Amazing. So I think we just had a unique, we were really fortunate to have this unique view from top leaders locally and globally that could give us a look on not only where we are and how amazing things are coming out of this country, but also a glimpse into the near future. I would like to thank our three amazing speakers for their wonderful, inspiring talks.